with Herr, who is the Republican candidate for Senator in Congress. Thank you for participating. Before we begin, let's review the format of the interview. This will be a live-to-tape interview. That means no edits once we begin. There is no pre-screening of questions, and answer will be limited to 2 minutes each. We will start with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate, and after the questions, we will conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. Mr. Herr, you have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the opportunity to come in today. It's great to be here. My name is Herr. I'm the Republican nominee running for United States Senate here in Massachusetts in 2014. I'll be on the ballot one-on-one this fall against Edward Markey. I'm the father of 5 children, and as the father of 5 children, I think about their future. I think about what the opportunities I had in my life, and I think about the opportunities for my kids someday coming forward, and I'm concerned about it. So I'm running for United States Senate to take care of my children, to take care of your children someday, and many other people across the Commonwealth and the country, obviously, too. You know, we've got some concerns in America today, and I think it's time that we change it up a little bit. Edward Markey has been in Washington, D.C. for a long time, and I think we need some new ideas and new energy in Washington.
Great. We will now proceed to the questions. Mr. Herr, you have up to 2 minutes to answer each question.
Sure.
What are the biggest issues facing the U.S. economy, and what policy priorities would you support to address them?
It's a great question. It's a very big question. It's the $69 million question, isn't it? There's a lot of things facing the U.S. economy right now. The challenges are many. As I mentioned with those 5 kids, my oldest is a senior in college. She's going to be graduating next year, and I'm concerned about her ability to get a job when she gets out of school. Like moms and dads across Massachusetts and across the country are worried about their kids getting jobs too. You know, the challenge is making sure that we create a climate where the private sector will in fact be able to create jobs in an economy that is growing at a measured and reasonable pace. And we don't see that today. It seems to be sputtering at best as we come out of the recession. The recession was very difficult for a lot of people. It was certainly difficult for my family. You know, we invested in some real estate, bought our dream house. And unfortunately, right after we bought the dream house, the market collapsed. And then the mortgage situation kicked in, and the mortgage markets collapsed. And so we were under a lot of pressure for a very long time, just like so many other families in Massachusetts. And we need to address those things. So I'm a big believer in making sure that we invest in the right way to create jobs in Massachusetts and the country. There's 3 key areas that I would encourage people to support and invest in. First and foremost, medical research. Medical research gives a great return on investment for taxpayers because we find cures to the many diseases that ail us all. The second thing it does is it creates jobs not only in the medical research field, but also in the industries that surround it. The second thing I would do is I'd make sure we invest in infrastructure. The roads and bridges of Massachusetts and the roads and bridges of the United States are under severe pressure, and we've got to do something to make sure we have good infrastructure so that we can move about and our economy can transact in a very healthy manner. And third, I think it's very important that we work on energy independence and renewable energy sources. Without an ability to generate our own energy here in America, we'll continue to get caught up in entanglements around the globe. It'll also create some excellent jobs that are well-paying, meaningful jobs.
Great. What would you do about individuals without proper documentation in the United States? What are the responsibilities of the U.S. government, the individuals themselves, and the countries from which they come?
Okay. So you're asking questions about immigration there, basically. I'm the product of legal immigration. My mom and dad came from Ireland to the United States in the late 1950s. They had 7 kids here in America, so I'm a U.S. citizen, obviously. They became U.S. citizens over a period of time. It took them several years to make that happen. I believe in legal immigration. I support the process of legal immigration. We are a melting pot for the world, but there has to be a process that we all follow to make that happen. The situation we have right now is the result of policies that, while we've had them in place for many, many years, we haven't enforced them for a long time. So I think it's important that, one, we seal the borders and manage the borders so that we don't continue to have people coming in that are undocumented that put more pressure on all the states here in the country. Secondly, we've got, and to do that, there's a couple of things we could talk about in terms of putting drones up in the air, putting some strategic fencing in place in intelligent places, and then I think also using our troops on the border where we could train them for their military operations around the globe that they may need to engage in someday as well. But I think you've got to make sure you take care of the border first, because if we don't stop the flow of people coming in, we're just going to keep having the problem repeat itself over and over again. Beyond that, then I think it's very important that for those that are already here, that we find a path that works for them, that works for the people that are currently in line, that are following the legal process, and that works for the rest of the American people, including the taxpayers that have to fund a lot of this. So I'm open to an idea, and I'm open to the opportunity to put in place some immigration reform that deals with those that are already here, but it doesn't put them in the front of the line, and it does not give them immediate amnesty either. I think it's something that people have to earn in over a period of time, just like my parents did. But I don't support what some people would suggest, which is taking everyone that's here illegally and sending them off tomorrow. I don't think that's a solid answer or solution.
What roles and responsibilities do federal, state, and local entities have in addressing U.S. energy policy? Are there circumstances in which federal policy should supersede state and local concerns?
Well, yes, I think it's a great question because there are certain things that the federal government should be doing, there are certain things that the state government should be doing, and there are certain things that the local government should be doing, or local governments. I'm a former selectman in Hopkinton, my town here in Hopkinton, in Massachusetts, a small town here in Massachusetts, and local governments have a role. State and federal governments have a role too. Specific to energy policy, I think the federal government absolutely has a role. There are some candidates running for elected office here in Massachusetts and around the country that are kind of the types that'll say, well, the federal government is just not getting anything right. It doesn't have a role. Get it out of my life. I don't believe in that. I believe the federal government does have a role. I'm not a government hater, but I think the government has to be managed in a more intelligent manner. I do think, as I mentioned in the opening discussion a couple minutes ago, or the first question about the economy, I do think it's important that we work towards energy independence, and I think the federal government can promote energy independence policies, not necessarily go out and spend money and buy factories and do those kinds of things, but promote policies that allow research to take place, that allow jobs to be created, that generate more ideas, that create a more of an energy independent model for America. I'm very strong and I believe very firmly that renewable sources of energy, while they're not very efficient today, they can be more efficient if we provide the research and technology infrastructure for them in the future. So I would support that a lot. I'm in the electrical distribution business, so I understand electricity and energy quite well, and I do think that there's opportunities there for improvement. If we do those things at the federal government level, and the states support that if they choose, and we don't want to dictate to the states necessarily how they do things, but if the states support that, if they choose with some other tax incentives for these types of manufacturing facilities, I think we could create a more energy independent America, which is a safer America, and I think it's a more robust economy for America too.
Great. Do you support or oppose the ongoing expansion of government surveillance and collection of telephone and electronic communications from Americans? Please explain your reasoning.
I took a class in 1992 or 1993 when I was getting my master's degree called Science, Technology, and the Modern Democratic State. And it was a great class 20 years ago, and that question plays right into that class and the topics that we discussed with our professor during that time. Technology will change politics, basically. And politics has to adjust to technology. And public policy has to adjust to technology. So yes, I think there's a concern right now, and it's a valid concern, that the federal government and state governments, and even local governments for that matter, all of them are looking in and gathering information that in years past they couldn't gather. So while I think technology is a good thing, and the advancement of the technology is a good thing. As an engineer, I believe in technology. I think it's important that we make sure that we have regulations and policies that keep up with the times. What we've seen in the last couple of years and some of the things that have been exposed are people doing things that followed old technology or old regulations for technology. And I think we have to update and modernize our rules and regulations to make sure people's privacy is protected. Bottom line is, I think it's important that we are able to collect data when it comes to crime prevention and crime solving techniques, if you will. But I don't think that outside of that the government really should be looking into who we're calling and why we're calling them and how long we're calling them. Those kinds of things I think are private matters that shouldn't be addressed. So yes, it's something we have to address pretty soon.
Great. What principles should drive U.S. foreign policy, and how would you prioritize these principles in practice?
Well, my principles for U.S. foreign policy are pretty straightforward. I believe in diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. And once we go through several steps of diplomacy and several attempts at diplomacy, and for whatever reason we can't get things sorted out, then I believe in diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy again. And then in other words, pretty much ad nauseum. We've got to keep working at it. We've got to keep talking. We've got to keep a dialogue going. To our question a minute ago about technology, I believe that technology, while it can help us all understand each other better around the world, it's also put additional pressure on a lot of countries around the world, because all of a sudden people are sharing things, and some of the things they're sharing may be inflammatory and they may not be accurate. They may be sort of contrived or made up pieces of information. So I'm very concerned about how we would apply all that to our new foreign policy approach. But I do believe in diplomacy, and I believe that to back that diplomacy up, however, it's very important that we have the strongest military operations and organization and force around the globe right here in the United States of America. You got to have diplomacy. You got to exhaust every possible peaceful solution to the challenges we have today around the globe. But we also have to have a very strong military to back that up, should we have to engage at some point. And there are times when we will have to engage. And when we do engage, we have to engage strongly, firmly, with a clear and concise plan, and make sure that people understand that we are very serious about getting something resolved in a timely manner. We can't sort of have this, right now what I see is a lot of okay, we're going to draw the line in the sand today, and then 3 weeks later we draw the line in the sand again. Those types of things are causing, I think, problems for American foreign policy. From my perspective, we have to be very clear. Senator Markey walked into a hearing last year and said, I'm voting present on an issue. I would never vote present on an issue. I would vote to make sure that America's interests are protected, but it's got to be first and foremost, and for several iterations, diplomacy.
Great. What should the U.S. government's role be in influencing international capital markets and expanding exports of U.S. goods and services?
Well, I look at foreign trade like a business deal. And I've been in business for 30 years. I'm in the commercial construction industry here in Massachusetts, and we do business transactions and we put contracts in place every day. So when you talk about foreign trade, you talk about the United States as an entity trying to do a deal with other countries around the globe. And I think for any business deal that works in the United States, any business deal that works in my industry and other industries, business deals that are best are those that it's as close to a win-win as you can get. It's close to both sides getting something reasonable for doing business together. And I think the challenge for the United States of America is to make sure as we cut these deals globally that we create win-win opportunities not only for our country but for the people that we're trying to sell our goods to. So if we can create those types of foreign arrangements, I think we all be better off. I support free trade. I think it makes sense to have free trade, but that free trade and those agreements that we put in place have to be reasonable and fair to both sides. Sometimes we try to have a upper hand in a situation, or another country's going to try and have an upper hand in the situation. And in those situations, I don't think it works very, very well. We've got to make sure that it's open and free.
Great. Does the U.S. government have a role in bridging the achievement gap? Please give us specific reasons why.
The achievement gap in terms of education,
yes.
Education for our students.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the U.S. government has a role in bridging the achievement gap. There are many states around the country with local education programs, local or state-run education programs or local education programs that are far less effective than what we have here in Massachusetts. We've got great schools here in Massachusetts. We've got great public schools. We've got great private institutions. I understand you're a graduate of one of the great public institutions here in Massachusetts. So all those opportunities that we have here in Massachusetts don't necessarily exist elsewhere in the country. And I think the federal government has a role in trying to bring those states along to help them bring up their level of education for their students. But at the same time, though, we shouldn't have Massachusetts sort of back off or take our foot off the gas in terms of public education as the federal government tries to bring other states forward. Some of the things that are being discussed now in terms of Common Core, which is one of the education advancements coming out of Washington, D.C., some people call that the race to the middle, where the states that are above the standards not that they want to, but they're going to take their foot off the gas a little bit as the states that are below the standards try to accelerate and catch up. And I don't think that that's necessarily an appropriate way to do it. I don't think that helps the people of Massachusetts or the students of Massachusetts. We should be able to continue to move forward with a strong education program that we have. And I do think it's okay for the federal government. And I support the federal government trying to help those other states come along, but not to have one group slow down while another group speeds up.
Right. So what strategies would you use for working with members of other parties and other people with opposing views? What experience do you have implementing these strategies?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's one of the fundamental problems that's going on in Washington, D.C. these days. Yeah, I look at Washington, D.C., and I've been studying politics and been involved in politics here in Massachusetts for about 20 years now. And there's clearly a political greed that has taken hold of our federal government and the elected officials that are down there in Washington. Until we can get rid of that political greed and get parties and individuals to get beyond worried about their self-interest, get beyond worried about their own re-election, and start focusing on the people and put people before politics, we're going to continue to have these challenges. The stalemate and stagnation that we see in Washington, D.C. is frustrating to many people, including myself. And that has to change. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've been in the construction business a long time. And when you're in the construction business and you go to the job site and the thing that you're bringing out to the job site that you engineered, it doesn't fit into the compartment where it's supposed to fit. The guys on the job site and the gals on the job site in today's world will use some language and they'll call you some names and they'll insult you and everybody else around you in your company. So I'm used to that. I'm used to kind of getting stuff thrown at me. But over the years, I have learned if you focus on solving the problem and you let all that noise slip off your back, you can get things done. And in Washington, D.C. today, we have a lot of folks that worry about what what people say to them, and they worry about the partisan thing first, and they worry about, well, so-and-so said that wasn't very nice. All that silly stuff, that all needs to go away. If we could just start behaving in Washington more like we behave in the construction industry, where we really focus on getting the job done, even though every now and then the emotions get the better of some people. If we could ignore this noise and focus on the issues, I think we can put people before politics and move America forward.
Great. Can you please give us an example of an issue that you and your opponent on the other side agree on, and 2 examples in which you differ, and why your position represents the best interest of the 5th Congressional District?
So our district is statewide for the U.S. Senate here in Massachusetts. Mr. Markey and he's the opponent. Mr. Markey's been in Washington, D.C. for 38 years, as I mentioned early, and I think it's time to get some fresh ideas and new energy in Washington to get us out of this gridlock and stalemate. And I have a different approach on how I do things. But where he and I would probably agree on an issue is the opiate addiction here in Massachusetts. It is a very scary situation for a lot of parents and a lot of kids in Massachusetts. It's one of those things in life where it's one and done. You try it once, you get hooked, and you're going to have a very difficult time getting off of it. I support it, and when Mr. Markey put out some ideas about how the federal government could help Massachusetts and other states deal with this opiate addiction, I supported that. I think it's very important that we make sure that we message to our children very early on, one and done. So please don't go there. So on that issue, he and I are very similar, and I would support what he's talked about thus far.
Great. And what are 2 examples in which you differ?
2 examples on where we differ. We differ on a lot more than probably 2 things. And we have a couple of things that we would agree on too, beyond the opiate thing. Clearly, I'm a big believer in having a private sector experience and public sector experience. Go to Washington, D.C. to represent the people of Massachusetts. Mr. Markey talks routinely about how he's going to fight on behalf of the people of Massachusetts and create jobs. But the fact remains that Mr. Markey's been in D.C. for nearly 40 years and he's never created one single job in the private sector. I have done that my entire career. You can't be in Washington, D.C. and creating policies and creating regulations and legislation to create jobs back in Massachusetts if you don't understand what that's doing. Sometimes they say we're going to create jobs in Washington, D.C. and ends up slowing down job creation in Massachusetts. The federal health care plan is a classic example of that. I believe in universal health care. I think it's a great idea for the people of Massachusetts because we want it here.
Great.
But the federal government shouldn't be dictating that.
Great. So now you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Well, I'll tell you, I appreciate the opportunity to come in. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the questions. To the people watching, thank you for watching this evening, this afternoon, whenever you're going to see the show. This is a great opportunity in 2014 for the people of Massachusetts to start a new revolution in America. 250 years ago, the people of Massachusetts stood up and said, enough. It's time to move forward as a country. And they got together and they did a great job in Massachusetts 250 years ago. Massachusetts can once again be the leader in America. We talked about the stalemate, we talked about the stagnation here during the show, and it's time for America to move forward again. If we can move forward again with a new idea and a new approach to governing, we can get things done. And I think the fact that Massachusetts, when they send a reasonable, responsible, respectful Republican to Washington, D.C., they will send a message to America that we're ready to stand up once again and move America forward together. So please, I'd ask you to consider voting for Brian Herr for U.S. Senate. My website is brianherr.com, and the Twitter account is @HerrForSenate. Thank you.
We want to thank you, Mr. Herr, for participating in our conversation. Please make your voice count by voting at the state primary on September 9th, 2014. For Arlington Public News, this is Hannah Perlmutter. Thank you.